Hello YouTube. So today we'll be making a pattern for a jacket as requested by some persons on the Michelot fashion group on Facebook. So what you need is your tape measure, scissors, pen, French curve, hip curve and a straight ruler. So let's get started. So I usually start my patterns by drafting the back of the pattern first. So now when you're making a jacket, the front of your measurement and the back of your measurement would be different. So I'm doing the back. So whatever measurement I get here is a half of the back part of the measurement. So for example, my shoulders would be 15 and the half of that would be 7.5 plus half inch for stitch allowance. When I'm drafting my pattern, I usually add the stitch allowance as I go along instead of drafting the pattern then adding the stitch allowance. Now since my shoulders are a bit sloped, I've just measured down 1.5 inches to accommodate that slope in my shoulders. Now I realized that 1.5 inches was too far down, so I went back up to about 3/4 of an inch. So that line I just drew right there will be my shoulder line. Now I measure about 7 inches down, and that would be my armhole, the end of my armhole. And right about there would be the bust line. Now as I said, say the back of my bust is 20 inches, then divided by 2 you get 10 plus stitch allowance, which in this case might be a half to 3/4 of an inch. Next I'm going to measure the neck, which is about 2.5 inch by an inch down since it's a jacket. If you're making since it's a basic slopper, if you're making a low cut back dress, then you go down about 4 or so inch. Depends on how low you want it. If it was a scoop neck blouse, you go across more than 2.5 inches. But since it's a jacket, 2.5 inches across by 1.5 inches down is perfect. Now I'm using my French curve right here to draw in the circle. Now the center back space there is to allow for zip or an extra seam. Since when drafting a pattern, the more seams you have, the better it will fit. Now where the center back line is, I might add, that should be cut twice, yes. Now I'm measuring the length of my waist, which is pretty much the length from my shoulders to where my waist is at my back. And for me that's about 16 inches down. Now I was just using that line, the bust line, to get it straight since I could not find my square ruler. Now for the waist, the back of my waist would measure in total 15 inches. I divide that by 2 since I'm drafting half of a pattern. That would be 7.5. I then add an inch and a half, that's for darts, and then half inch to 3/4 inch depending on how much you want for seam allowance. So that's what I'm trying to calculate at this moment. Well, since my jacket would be a little bit, it's a jacket and I will wear something underneath it, I decided to up the back of my waist to 8 inches instead of 7.5 plus 1.5 inch for darts, then 3/4 for seam allowance. I then connected the line from the bust to the waist. For my hip, that's about 7 inches down, so I measure that. and the entire length of my jacket would be 26 inches. So as is, you measure the entire back of your hip, which is pretty much around your bum, and you divide that by 2, then you add seam allowance. If it's a case where the darts will also end up at the end of the jacket, as in they will go from the top to the end of the jacket, you have to add an extra half or inch to accommodate that. So the back of my hip, say it's 12 inches, 24 inches, sorry, divided by 2 will be 12 inches plus an inch for where my darts would be, and then a 3/4 of an inch for seam allowances. Now I just use my hip curve to draw the line. Now I'm marking in my seam allowances since I already calculated them as I do the measurement. As I said before, some persons do the measurements and then they add the seam allowance. I find it much easier to just add everything together and then mark off the seam allowances. So I'm pretty much just rechecking to ensure that all the measurements I got were correct. And now I'm trying to find out where to place my darts. Now when placing your darts, you do not use the seam allowance in the calculation. So you measure the distance from the center back line to where the seam allowances would start, and then you divide that by 2, and that's exactly where you get your darts. Now I added an inch and a half for darts, which means that it would be 3/4 of an inch, sorry, on either side. So I mark 3/4 of an inch on the right side of the line and 3/4 of an inch on the left side of the line, and then I connect the dots to the top. I mark a half inch at the bottom since I did add an extra inch at the end of the garment to facilitate the darts coming to the bottom. So I just draw in my darts. So when you are going to sew, you sew along the dart lines. And now I use my French curve to join my armhole. Now since I'm pressed for time, I'm going to use the same back of the garment as the front of the garment. But the measurements will generally be the same. You measure the front of your bust, divide it by 2, measure the front of your waist, divide it by 2, and also the front of your hip and divide it by 2. So now I have the front of the garment, and this is the important part now, to actually draw the lapel for the jacket. Now I want my jacket to break about 3 inches or so above my waist. Now what I'm measuring right here is the button space. When you have on a jacket and it's going to be buttoned, there needs to be a space for it to overlap. And this is about 2 inches. As I said before, I'm just using the back of the slopper that I drafted to demonstrate, since I don't have enough time to make a second pattern. Now this is how you get the break for the jacket. From the neckline, you continue the line outwards, so as far as you want, depending on how big a break you want. And then using my curve ruler, I connect the lines. And that's pretty much it. And then you just cut it out. And the lapel that I make is about 3 inches, since half inch would be for stitch allowance. Now when you realize when you're making a jacket and you break it, you do not see the wrong side of the fabric, you actually see the right side of the pattern fabric, which means that the lapel piece would have to have a duplicate made. So as I break it along the fold, you see the wrong side of the paper. Now I have to make a facing for that side of the jacket.
Okay.
So what I'm doing now is demonstrating how you would make the facing. So what you do is you put the front piece of the jacket pattern on a new piece of paper, and then you cut it out as such. So that becomes your jacket facing. So when you break the color of your jacket, you then see the fashion fabric and not the wrong side of it. Lastly, what I'm going to do now is pretty much quickly draft the color. Now my fabric should be on the fold, or my paper rather, but I'm out of paper. So right there that I'm writing would be on the fold. Now the part which I'm drawing the line will be the part that will be attached to the actual neck of the jacket. So what you do is you measure the neck of the jacket, and mine is usually about 4 inches. And you draw a straight line, and then from that 4 inches you basically draw a curve. Now the width of my collar would be about 4 inch, and that depends on how big a collar you want. It can be anywhere between 3 to 4 inches. Now I find that drawing a curved line after you've measured the 4 inches makes it a lot neater to put in, instead of drawing a straight line all the way from one end of the paper to the next end of the paper. And right now I'm just marking that this is the line where it actually stitch on the jacket itself.